Today's the day, ladies and gentlemen. I will be ranking every single dungeon encounter in Destiny 2. And I guarantee you, this list will be polarizing. Right here, I've got every single dungeon encounter listed out, and we're going to be ranking them on a scale of F to S. But what's the criteria? Well, I'm so glad you asked, viewer that's listening behind the screen. I'm going to be ranking these dungeons on three main criteria. Jesus Christ. I'm going to be sorting these dungeons based on three different criteria. My enjoyment of the mechanics, so there's going to be a little bit of bias there, the overall difficulty of the dungeon, and any sort of aesthetic value that the dungeon provides. I'm going to be ranking these both from the perspective of a solo player going for an emblem, and as a fire team doing it as a full team of three. So let's get right into it with the dungeon that started it all, Shattered Throne. And it's not off to a good start. The intro to this dungeon is so mundane, and it kills any motivation I have to run it, just with that little bit. Take note of that theme, it's going to be common throughout this whole video. The mechanics aren't really groundbreaking, there aren't really that many mechanics to speak of, but I'm willing to give it a pass seeing as this is the first dungeon ever introduced into the franchise. Aesthetically, I really wish I could give it more points, but it's hard to judge the aesthetics of this dungeon when I can't see anything. I'm sure the arenas that are in this dungeon look great, but no one's ever gonna know because no one can see it. So this might be a little bold for the very first entry of the list, but the intro to Shattered Throne is going right into F. Yeah, that feels right. Next up is Vorgeth, the first boss fight of the Shattered Throne, and this is definitely a step up from the introduction. All of the enemies feel way more threatening, and the mechanics feel way more fleshed out, so just in general, it's a way more enticing experience than the first encounter. However, Vorgeth loses almost all of his points for me from a difficulty standpoint. Vorgeth has the least amount of health out of any raid or dungeon boss in the entire game, with just under 500k. He just crumbles to a full fire team, and even for solo players, it's very easy to optimize your damage and get a quick one phase on him. Once again, the aesthetic here is shit. I'm sure the arena looks great, but I wouldn't know that because I can't see it. For all of those reasons combined, Vorgeth is ending up in the D tier for right now. Next up is Duality, the final boss of the Shattered Throne, and thankfully they end the dungeon on a pretty high note. Now like, Duality is still missing the health threshold that I think is necessary for a final boss of a dungeon, but the three knights roaming around make for a very interesting challenge. I also like that the buff in this encounter has a different function than it did in the Vorgeth encounter. I mean, it all relates to damage, but how you use it and take advantage of it is different, which I do really like. The arena, once again, doesn't have much going for it aesthetically, but it is very small, which makes for some very interesting positioning decisions, especially from the perspective of a solo player trying to get their emblem. With all of that in consideration, I think B is a great spot for Duality. Alright. Holy shit. Oh my god!
What the fuck? What the actual fuck?
With that out of the way, we now move on to Pit of Heresy, the Shadowkeep dungeon from Destiny 2. We're starting with Necropolis, the first encounter, and this is essentially the same thing as the intro to Shattered Throne. Necropolis essentially has all of the same issues that Shattered Throne does with its intro. It's slow-paced, and the tasks that you get are really mundane. Fortunately, the mechanics are a little more fleshed out, and you can actually see what's going on around you. The aesthetic is a little better. So, it still goes in F, but it's just a little higher than Throne's intro. After Necropolis is the Ogre Maze, which is fine the first time through. I'm not crazy about it. I think it's very cool the first time through, but on repeat plays, it sort of starts to feel like a chore. Either way, it's still a decently cool experience, so I think I'm gonna throw it in D for now. And if I change my mind, we can always move it up. But it's going to D, and it's probably not gonna change. Next up is the Chamber of Suffering, and this is where dungeon encounters start to get really good, because this encounter is so much fun. Between waves upon waves of enemies and balancing close and far range combat, this encounter kind of demands a lot out of you. And normally I would put it into B tier because I think it's just okay, but the solo experience of this fight is so grueling and so much fun that I have to be a little biased and I have to put it into A tier. I think that's fair. I don't think anyone's gonna be too mad about that. And of course, to end off the Pit of Heresy, we need to talk about Zulmak, the final boss. And I really wish I could rank this encounter higher, but I can't. Aesthetically, this is definitely one of my favorite dungeon encounters. Zulmak himself just looks really cool, and doing damage from inside the Ring of Fire, it's just so fucking cool, you can't even deny that. The rest of the encounter, however, is really subpar. To be fair, I've never really been a fan of the sword mechanics, so I'm showing a bit of bias there. but I just kind of wish there was a little more challenge to this encounter. I wish the mechanics were a little more fleshed out. So at the end of the day, I can't give Zolmak anything higher than a B.
You should be good to just,
Am I W keying?
drop. Fuck.
With that out of the way, now we are on to Prophecy, the only free-to-play dungeon. We're starting off with the Phalanx Echo, and for such a cool dungeon, this boss really drops the ball for me. All things considered, this starts out as a pretty good encounter. This is a very cool arena, we've got really good ad density, and pretty cool, if not finicky, light and darkness based mechanics. However, once DPS starts, this fight starts to fall apart. Call me elitist if you want, but this boss has not enough health for the amount of time that we get to damage it. You have to remember, dungeons are a piece of the PvE endgame in Destiny 2. They should feel like it. Bosses shouldn't fall flat like this. The solo experience is a little more challenging just because the ads are a lot to manage, but a full fire team can really just wipe it out so consistently in one phase without even that much coordination. So for that reason, I have to put it in D tier. Once again, Prophecy continues to rack up W's in the aesthetic category with the cube, the next encounter in the dungeon. This fight is a bit slower, but you at least are in control of how fast you can go to an extent, which I do really like about it. Mechanically, it's honestly about a 50-50 split for me. I could do with a few less phases in this. I mean, 5 is a little tedious sometimes, but at the same time, the idea of rotating the entire room whenever you make a move, it just tickles my brain for some reason. I can't really explain it. For those reasons, it is going to go in a very respectable high C tier. And to be fair, I don't think C is even that bad. I think C is a middle of the road encounter. This is like average dungeon level material. And finally, we are on to Kel Echo, the final boss of Prophecy. And Kel Echo has everything I want in a dungeon encounter. The rotating arena gimmick that the cube introduced is back in this encounter, and honestly, I think this encounter does it way better than the cube did. My favorite part of this encounter, however, is the boss, and especially when we're damaging the boss. From defeating the fake Kels to chasing the real Kel through that final arena, which looks fucking sick, I love this encounter and it keeps me engaged throughout the whole fight. So with that reasoning, I am very happy to put Kel Echo as our very first S tier entry on the list.
I typed 21 into the Spotify search bar, and I like that they got confused whether I wanted 21 Pilots, 21 Guns, or 21 Savage.
Y'all, 22 Savage just came out.
Oh, new patch! New patch! With Prophecy out of the way, we are now on to Heresy, the first encounter in Grasp of Avarice. And Heresy is almost a good challenge. If it weren't for the rampant super regeneration, I think that this fight would be a real challenge for a lot of players. Well, maybe not, it doesn't have that much health, but you know. Even with that stipulation though, I want to make it clear that this fight is still pretty good. Freeze is a quick fight and has some pretty decent loot behind it, which makes it a good option for farming, so you can't be too mad at that. All in all, this is about on the same level as the cube for me. It's a real standard middle of the road encounter. So Heresy is going into C. Next up is the Sparrow race in Grasp of Avarice, and it's going about on the same level as the Ogre Maze. It's cool the first time through, a little tedious any other time after that, but I don't think it's quite as tedious. So for the Sparrow section in Grasp, we will put that at a very low C. Alright, we're on to the Fallen Shield, and I gotta level with you. This is the encounter that made me want to make this video, because I hate this encounter. Well, it does get some brownie points because it's honestly really fun watching the servitors fly at the shield. There's really nothing else redeeming about this fight. Flying between the islands is fun at first, but I think it really kills the pacing when you go all the way across the map and then you have to go all the way back for the next one. Moving the servitors themselves are really janky and it just isn't fun. Yeah, this encounter really just doesn't have that many redeeming qualities, and the ones it does have can't really push it up any higher for me. It's going in F. And of course, we can't talk about Grasp without talking about Avarok, the fallen captain and the final boss of this dungeon. Avarok falls into a similar role as Zolmak to me, where it had so much potential to live up to, and I wish I could like it more, but it just fumbles at the finish line. This encounter has a pretty distinct lack of innovation, and it almost feels like just a copy and paste of the Ogre fight, but with more engrams. And a lot of the difficulty from this fight feels artificial because it's not even coming from the boss or most of the ads. It's coming from the sniper shank that has so much health for some reason. I don't know where that inspiration came from. The aesthetic of the arena is decent, but not enough to really move it up any higher ranks. So Avarok is going, sadly, into the C tier.
Oh, well, fuck you, Dalton. Jesus.
Sorry, I'm gonna fucking die for it. You're good.
No.
I refuse to traverse this encounter the way God intended. Now we move on to Duality, the first dungeon of Witch Queen, and we're talking about the Galron fight. And I actually really like this encounter. All of Duality is getting a little bit of a buff for the aesthetics, because the Nightmare Realm is so cool. And honestly, I think this is what Shattered Throne really should have been. The mechanics themselves are pretty engaging, and even if they're a little tedious in the solo experience, I don't mind doing it that much. I don't know, I just don't really have much to say about Galron. It's just going into a very simple A. After Galron is the Vault, and it's okay. No, there's not really much to say about it. The Vault doesn't really offer anything groundbreaking, but it's also not doing anything too offensive either. Once again, it's your standard middle-of-the-road dungeon encounter. The solo experience can be a little tedious, and so can the full Fireteam experience, but it is nowhere near as bad as something like Necropolis or Fallen Shield. So, the Vault from Duality is going into the C tier, if not a low one. And with that, we are on to Kaido, the final boss of Duality. I really fucking like this fight. Kaido provides such a unique challenge as a dungeon boss that I honestly love every time I play it. Specifically, I love the whole process that's needed to start the damage phase. I don't think we've really seen anything like that in a dungeon before, so I love seeing that innovation. The aesthetic, once more, is on point, as it always has been with Duality, and the adds and mechanics really keep you on your toes for the whole fight. With all of that under our belt, I think it is safe to say that Kaido belongs in the S tier. And I don't care if you're mad in the comments about that. I think this is an awesome fight.
Well, no, he's forced to put all his money into the Bugatti. So, like, he has $0 in his bank account. If all his money is on the train track and it's gonna get destroyed.
I swear to God, Zachariah, I'm gonna literally kill you because you keep talking.
Next, we move on to my favorite dungeon in the game. Maybe. I don't really know. We move on to Spire of the Watcher, starting with the Ascent. And I really wish I had better things to say about this fight, because I love this dungeon. I love this dungeon. I am really trying to find reasons to get this higher than F, but I am struggling, because this encounter does not have much redeeming about it at all. It's essentially on the same level as all the other intro encounters, and the aesthetic is cool, but it's not really enough to move it up anywhere. Ascent is going into a very disappointing F tier. After the dumpster fire that is Ascent, Atlas is a refreshing change of pace. The Spire mechanics aren't anything flashy, but I love how they integrate the entire arena into your gameplay. You quite literally have to go all over the place in the encounter, and I love that the whole arena is utilized. I also love how ad clear really matters in this fight. If you're going into the damage phase really rashly and you're not clearing any of your ads, you're gonna get gunned down by harpies for the entire fight. B tier for Atlas. Not really much else to say besides that. And to end off Spire, we have to talk about Perseus, the final boss. This fight is essentially the same as Atlas, but with better mechanics and a way cooler environment. I love how dynamic Perseus is, at least in comparison to other dungeon bosses. I love the whole mechanic of baiting him into the room towards the nuclear reactor, and I could rank Perseus a little higher if it weren't for all the rampant supplicants. They're not too much for me to move it down a tier, but I can't go any higher than this. So Perseus is landing itself in a very respectable A tier.
Guys, do you remember 0 Hour?
Bro, this is just like 0 Hour.
Yo, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just like
With that, we have made it into the Lightfall area, which means it's time to talk Ghosts of the Deep. And the intro encounter is really bad. I just don't know what to say. I don't know how you can make a dungeon encounter worse than Fallen Shield, but somehow, 2 claps, Bungie, you've done it. Part of the reason I so rarely run Ghosts, even though I want the Navigator so bad, is because of this first encounter. I just can't bring myself to do it sometimes. It just puts me to sleep. Which, when you think about it, is a shame because I think the rest of the dungeon is really good, but we'll get into that later. For now, Ghost intro, if you couldn't guess, F tier. Easiest F tier of my fucking life. After that intro and the hour-long hike through the water is Ekthar. Ekthar is really cool. The whole atmosphere is just tense for the whole fight. There's so many ads, Ekthar has so much health, which takes it down a notch, but it's still really good, trust me. The underwater sections take it down just a little bit for me, but I do like how the underwater sections are utilized overall. Still, I think putting Ekthar in a respectable B is totally fair. Alright, now, we're on to the final boss of Ghosts, and this is gonna be a controversial one, so buckle up. I really like this fight. I like this fight so much that it barely dodges S for me. That's how much I like it. This is almost the coolest dungeon arena we have seen to date. There's one cooler, so stay tuned for that. But this one is up there, fighting on the corpse of Oryx. I also just generally love how effectively the whole arena is used. Like, we've seen arenas before that look cool, but it's mostly just set pieces. But in terms of this fight, the whole space is used very effectively, and very creatively at that, so that gives it some points for me as well. The moths, you know, could chill the hell out for a little bit, but it's not enough for me to take it down at all. As you can see, Samuma is in A tier. Please, for the love of God, don't cook me in the comments.
Whee! Ow.
And with that, we're on to our final dungeon, the most recent dungeon, Warlords Ruin. Let's talk about it, starting with Rathiel, the first chieftain. There's really not much to say about Rathiel because there's not much going on in this fight. It's quick, which is going to make it a good farming encounter in the future, and while I wish that there was a little more meat on the bones mechanically, I think it's also okay because it's an introductory encounter to the dungeon. It doesn't have to be too complicated. So, Rathiel is going into a very respectable, middle-of-the-road C tier. After Rathiel and the section of Doom is the Locus of Wailing Grief, and this fight's pretty good. There's a few stipulations there, because it's far from perfect, but it's pretty good. I like that the Acolyte eyes get a new purpose from what they had when we were fighting Rathiel. It keeps things fresh, keeps us on our toes, especially when we're learning the dungeon. And I also really like how we have to move around the arena to do damage. Barely misses A for me, because I'm not really a fan of the shooting beam of death that will just slam you into walls and push you off the edge. I think that is really lame when that happens, but that's just me. You can disagree with me if you want. It's a free country. Blah, 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 blah. So for those reasons, the Locus ends up in a very respectable B tier. And just like that, we are on to our final encounter of this video. The Siren from Warlords Ruin. This encounter is so fucking awesome. I don't really know what the general public's opinion is on the Siren, but I absolutely love every part of this fight. By far, this is my favorite arena in any dungeon encounter. I love how effectively it's used. I love jumping from platform to platform, which I don't think is something that's happened in a dungeon yet, besides the Ascent. And as annoying as they are, the roaming hex bears they have to melee aren't so bad that I would move it down a tier. Right from the moment I started writing this video, I knew where this encounter was going. The whole fight is tense and difficult in the best way possible, and for that reason, to round off the list, the Siren is going into S tier. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The list is complete. If you liked it, you agree with it, come let me know in the comments. And if you disagree, Lord knows we can't be civil, so also let me know. But please don't be an asshole. I have feelings. They get hurt easily. Bye.